welcome back to Shoogly Shed Motors. We're going to hopefully get the bike a first start today. Very exciting. What I've been doing in the background is basically getting on with measuring the valve clearances. So if you don't know, in these engines it's a little bit complicated, and I'll walk you through it in a minute. A little bit complicated and it takes a bit of time. But I think I have all the things I need now to finish off the valve clearance measurements and checks, get the valve cover back on the engine, get some fuel in the carbs, and hopefully turn this thing over. So the bike's been sitting for a couple of days with some clean rags over the camshafts and valves so that nothing goes down the engine. The way these sort of twin overhead cam engines, the valve clearances are done, they have followers on top of the valve springs, which then have a shim, and that shim can be bought in different sizes in various increments, and that's the way you adjust the valve clearances, so the clearance between the cam lobe and the top of that shim. You'll use a feeler gauge like this one, and according to the specifications, check that gap with the feeler gauge. If it's right, no problems. If it's wrong, you then need to remove that shim, see what size the shim is, see how much you need to expand or contract that gap by, and then order the correct shim to that size, and then refit that shim into the follower, and then hopefully remeasure your gap and it will be within spec. Doesn't sound like a whole lot of work, but there are 16 valves on this engine, so it does take a bit of time. Also, you need a special tool, of course, a special tool in order to hold the followers down, to then remove the shim, because the shim is quite tight and there's not a lot of space, a very, very small space there should be between that shim and the cam lobe. So very inexpensive, this little tool, but it is pretty necessary. So what I've been doing is I've been measured all the gaps, noted them all down in a chart, gone through, removed each shim, noted down what shim was in there, put it back in, because you can't turn the engine over without a shim in that follower. Put it back in, and then once I've got the values of all the shims in the engine, I can then figure out what need changed. You can swap some round to get the correct gap, and I've also had to buy 6 brand new shims from Yambits. So hopefully now that I've got all my measurements done, I just need to go through each shim, each valve and shim, and replace the shims to the correct order and correct positions, and then we should be within spec and ready to turn the engine over. Right, so we've just been through all the shims and changed them all to the appropriate ones that I have calculated. We've got 6 new shims in there and 4 old shims repositioned to hopefully, you know, close up and open up some gaps. Yeah, what I need to do now, last thing, it's such a long process. What I need to do now is measure all the gaps again, double check that they're all now within tolerance, and then the valve cover can go back on. So I'm going to do that now, measure them all, and then hopefully we're ever closer to that first turnover. Right, all my valve clearances are in spec now. A little bit of jiggery pokery, one of them was just a little bit tight, but I managed to find a little, well, I managed to find a shim that was actually just a little bit slack, switched the 2 around and they're both bang on now, so phew, 16 valves all cleared correctly. So valve cover goes back on now and hopefully the engine is nice and safe to turn over. Although I use my battery ratchet quite a lot, and impact drivers and things like that, I always try and finish things off by hand, because it's just a better feel for how tight something is. I mean, these will have specific torque settings, but in general, valve covers just need to be nipped up so that the rubber gasket gets pressure on it and that creates enough of a seal. Right, it would be prudent of me after this engine rebuild to check the oil galleries are filling with oil and the oil is getting up to the head. So in order to do that on this engine, there's a check plug over here on the right hand side of the cylinder head. Slacken that off, I'm not going to take it out fully, it just needs to be slack. And then I've also refitted the spark plugs into their caps but not into the bores, and they're contacting the head so that they will still get a ground. I can also check my spark this way, but what I'll do is I'll turn the bike over on the starter motor a few times and just check that the oil is actually going where it needs to go. The oil cooler of course will be empty currently, so that will start to fill up and my oil level will drop fairly significantly, so I need to keep an eye on that and then top up the oil as required. It's a little bit of a delicate procedure again, but you just need to go through these checks, these appropriate checks, so that you don't put all the hard work into rebuilding an engine and have to rectify a fairly large error like oil starvation. Right, okay, so we all know the three things required for an engine to run. You need compression, and I'm assuming by the wild puffs of air coming out when I had the spark plugs out that I've got compression. You need a spark, and I've got spark now, as you saw. The other thing you need, obviously, is fuel. So off camera, a couple of days ago, I rebuilt the carburetors with new internals and things, and so they are fresh and good to go. All we need to do is hook up an auxiliary fuel line and then try and fire this bike up. I've literally got little shaky hands. I hate this kind of thing because it is a culmination of lots and lots and lots of work. But I have to have faith in myself and see if this goes. On goes the ignition. That's the kill switch disengaged, so here goes. The battery might be a bit low. I think my battery voltage has dropped down low from all the testing. I think I've got a spare battery I can connect up just to get that extra juice. Nothing yet. Okay, I'm going to set the battery on to charge and have a cup of tea and come back. Okay, battery is fully charged. Let's try again. And it goes. Going to give it some choke as well. Yeah. There's a wee hiccup there. It tried. This thing to check is there definitely fuel getting to the carbs. Turn the ignition off just now. Let's just crack one of the screws here. Yep, definitely fuel in that carb. Try the other one while I'm here. Yep. There's definitely fuel getting to the carbs. Let's whip the spark plug out again. Definitely getting spark. something isn't doing what it should be. Just flattening the battery again. Definitely got fuel, definitely have spark, definitely have compression. So why is it not firing? Answers on a postcard. So to me there's a carburetor issue, because we definitely have spark, we definitely have compression. I don't think the fuel is getting to where it needs to be for the bike to start. I'm a bit perplexed, not entirely sure what's going on and why the fuel's not getting to where it needs to be, but a little bit of digging will be required, and I definitely need to charge the battery yet again. So, yeah, frustration. Right, it's the next day. Charged the battery overnight. I did a little bit of research, and I think the coils might have been wired the wrong way round. Just the CDI wires on the wrong way round, so I've switched them round. I'm going to try and turn it over again, and hopefully we'll get some kind of action here. I am pretty confident. What I did was I scooshed some brake cleaner, sorry, into the carburetors and turned it over, and it did try a couple of pops and bangs, so I think it's going to go. That's why I'm confident, but we'll see. Right, ignition on. That's the solenoid on. Let's go for it. Well, it was running. It was revving its nuts off, was the only thing. It was definitely drawing too much fuel there. There was a bit of smoke there, but what I think that is when I put the exhaust on. If you remember a few episodes ago, I used a little smear of grease to keep the exhaust gaskets in place. I've done that before, and that's what happened. I just got a bunch of smoke on first start up while that grease, sorry, got burnt off. So let's try again. It's still over revving. Hey, the long and short of it though is that the bike is running. I need to figure out why it is trying to rev its nuts off, but like I say, it still wants to rev too highly. Let's play about with the idle screw. Hopefully that might make a bit of a difference. It's acting as if the choke's on. Now, one thing I might add is that obviously I'm running pod filters here, and it's just standard jetting and a custom exhaust. So that's basically a bad combination for trying to get a bike to run correctly. Gonna need to tinker quite a bit with getting different jetting, and maybe alter my filters a little bit to try and get the bike running as best as I can. Just, it's one of these things with CV carbs and pod filters and custom exhausts. You're messing with all the fuel air and mixture ratios, so you're kind of asking for trouble. But what I'll hopefully do is get a bit of time once it's actually running reliably to start to tinker with it and dial those in a little bit.
Like I've said in the past, I would really like to get some flat slides for this, which would make that a lot easier. So it's something to think about in the future, but for the time being, the bike's running. Just checking it over for oil leaks. Nothing obvious. Obviously it's a wee bit smoky. But that's sounding pretty good. Woo. I'm gonna get out here, I'm getting smoked out. Right, I've come outside the sheds because that was getting pretty exhaust fumey and smoky. The VHT paint on the exhausts are also smoking off, so there will be quite a bit of smoke while all the oil and from stuff in the rebuild, the grease in the exhaust gaskets and the VHT paint and all that stuff smokes off, but there's no oil leaks I can find. Having a wee good go over the engine there. It sounds great, sounds very smooth in fact. Big inline 4 should sound quite smooth, so I'm glad about that. It just needs a bit of tuning, to be honest. Obviously I'll need to let it run a little bit, maybe just take it for a wee round the block and back, and then have a look at the spark plugs and see what they're looking like, see kind of what our fuel mixture's at. I've got plenty of scope to play with that though. The main thing is that it runs. I'm so pleased. Can you tell? One of these kind of things where until you've actually put fuel in the bike and tried to start it, there's always that little niggling thing in the back of your head about this, you know, getting it started. And at the end of the day, a motorbike's meant to be ridden and run, not just looked at. So I'm over the moon, very chuffed that it does indeed run. And hopefully with a little bit of tinkering, we can make it run even better. Anyway, I hope that that's been enjoyable to see the bike start up for the first time. That's like 2.5 years worth of work to get to there, so I'm very pleased. As usual, please do give me a like, leave me a comment and subscribe to the Shoogly Shed channel, and I will hopefully see you next time. Not sure what I'm going to be doing, maybe getting it a wee bit more tuned, getting the tank on, maybe getting out on the road, don't know. Needs to get its MOT and all that stuff, but this is a huge hurdle to have gotten over and I'm very chuffed. Take care, goodbye. Let's turn the ignition on. Set live. Here it goes. Oh, it's in first gear.